OSCON 2013. I'm r0ml, a senior editor at O'Reilly, and I'm here with Robert Lefkowitz, otherwise known as r0ml. And he is one of our favorite speakers here at OSCON. Thank you for being here today.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here today.
So I know that you dabble in the realm of philosophy and apply it to code and programming. How did that originate for you?
Well, strangely enough, I guess I have to give O'Reilly credit, because I was a programmer and studied computer science, and I never had much truck with philosophy. But when I had to speak at an O'Reilly conference, I had to think about what I was doing for the first time, and actually the question that started it all was, what does open source mean? And the more I delved into that, the sort of the thornier it seemed to get, and the farther afield I went, and I discovered that was philosophy.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit, sort of some of the more interesting things that you've come upon thinking about philosophy and programming in the open source world.
Well, I've done a lot of reading, mostly about literacy. I think more recently is that sort of this focus on source code. The source is a text of a kind, and
Sure.
so I started getting interested in other kinds of texts, and the history of text, and so that sort of led into a whole exploration of reading and writing and literacy.
Sure.
Sort of over time.
Yeah, we've talked about sort of programming as being like a new literacy, which I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Or what I'm trying to make it be is the old literacy revisited.
Interesting. So how do you think that's different than saying like new literacy? It's kind of being revisited.
So one of the things that I tell people is that programming is really the sort of extension of the classical rhetoric, the tradition of classical rhetoric into the 21st century.
And you have said that rhetoric is the ability to move people to action. So what part of programming process is rhetoric?
Well, so the initial analogy was, if rhetoric is moving people to action through a text, then programming is moving automata to action through a text.
I see.
And then there's a history in the computer science field of sort of, and software engineering in general, of people concerned about the readability of the text for other programmers.
Okay.
So maintainability and so
Sure.
forth. So when you're writing it, you're not just writing it for the computer, you're writing it for your future self, you're writing it for other programmers who may want to maintain it. In an open source community, you're writing it for potential contributors,
Sure.
and et cetera. So it is partly about moving automata to action, but then it's partly about moving other people to action in a different context, but it's still moving people to action. So how is it not rhetoric then?
That's a very good point, and over time too. How does this specifically affect someone in open source? I think you've kind of touched upon this a little bit, and that it is so many people taking a look at what's in that source code.
Right. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to do by making these connections is to try to get a sort of a longer sense of history, right? If it's, and in the programming field in general, we tend to have a very short sense of history, that things that are more than 5 years old are antiquated. But when you start moving away from the particular technologies and looking for underlying themes and truths, those should be longer lasting than 5 years old, and therefore we ought to be looking further back in time and trying to connect up what we're doing with sort of the larger flow of history.
So considering that you're looking at all of that history, right? What do you see for the future of open source and programming? And do you think we'll be learning from what we've done?
Well, I think it gets, as it becomes more ubiquitous, it changes in a couple of different ways. So I think one is it becomes more universal and ubiquitous. And one of the things that that I'm interested in is sort of the movement towards universal literacy. So if programming is a type of literacy, and you see a lot more you see a lot more interest today, and we should teach more people how to code. We should teach everybody how to code. And what did that look like? If we're not talking about coding, but sort of original literacy, like when did we get this idea that everybody should learn how to read, and how do we go about it, and what made it successful in some places more so than others. So I think it'll help inform that whole movement if we understand that history. The second thing that happens is when it's a craft literacy, and there's only a few of us doing it, relatively speaking, as a percentage of the population, then it's a thing. But once it achieves universality, then it's not going to be a thing anymore. It's going to be different things to different people, and many different things to many different people. So it'll fragment in all kinds of interesting ways, which I don't know, and anybody can predict what it's going to look like in the future. But I think, and there'll be some discomfort around that fragmentation initially, because people are going to want to, they'll see the fragmentation potentially as a sort of a disintegration of the community, or as opposed to a sort of a flowering of it.
Do you think that hopefully common language of code is a good thing? I'm getting that you think it is a good thing, but
well, what I think is new and unique is that historically, people learned to read to become better people, and you have all of these sort of ideas about people in the log cabin by the light of the fire, poring over books, learning, improving themselves through reading. So there's this notion that you could improve yourself by reading is deeply ingrained in our culture. But not so much writing. Writing is not how you improved yourself, right? But mostly writing was more of a craft, and you did that for other people, right? You did it as a commercial enterprise. You wrote things for other people to read. And I think what's different about programming is you can become you can learn through writing more so than in the past. Which is not to say you couldn't do that with traditional literacy, but in fact, programming texts are not meant to be read by other people as much as some to be read by computers. So it's the act of writing that teaches you, and I think that shift from reading to writing sort of makes a difference in why it's such a great idea.
Interesting. Well, thank you for joining me.
It was a pleasure.
I look forward to seeing you at many OSCONs to come.
I'll be there.